We're going to meet Romeo, and this happens in Act 1 around line 115, and I want you to turn to your text and follow with me. The first time that we meet Romeo, we don't meet him himself. We meet him through Benvolio on line 116. We're gonna take a look at those lines a little bit closer today. So in line 116, Lady Montague, Romeo's mother, has asked, "Have you seen Romeo?" And here's what Benvolio says. He says, "Madam, an hour before the worshipped sun peered forth the golden window of the east, a troubled mind drove me to walk abroad, where underneath the grove of sycamore, the western rooted from the city side, so early walking did I see your son." It's very interesting that we see Romeo from someone else's perspective. We have here is setting up an idea, it's in the text, is this dichotomies. Dichotomy is something that has two sides, night and day, hot and cold. Dichotomy we see here is this external perspective. So externally, Benvolio sees Romeo and then tells this to Romeo's mother. There are some other ideas of the dichotomy. They'll continue throughout the text as subjectivity and objectivity. Subjectivity is me, what I know, what I think. And when I look at you, I do not know what you think. That's objectivity. I can understand your situation better than you can because you are subjective about that experience. So this is true for Romeo as well. In the text, we learn from Montague, Romeo's father, that Romeo has been, and this is around like, with tears augmented the fresh morning dew. So he's been crying. Adding to clouds more clouds was his deep sigh. So Romeo's emotional state is very upset, but also soon as all the tearing sun in the forest is begin to draw, it's around lines 119. When the sun comes out and the day is beautiful, objectively, subjectively, Romeo goes into his room and pulls down the curtains and makes for himself an artificial night. This is another dichotomy that appears between something that is natural and something that is artificial. So in the natural world, it's a beautiful day, but in the artificial world, it's Romeo's emotional state. He's in the dark room, in the dark spot, and no one can really understand why he feels this way. In fact, we see in the text that they're wondering what the cause of Romeo's unhappiness is, and that's on line 141. We can see that line. He says, "My noble uncle," this is Benvolio talking to Montague, "do you know the cause?" And Montague says, "I neither know it, nor can I learn of him." This is an interesting dichotomy as well. How can we know someone else's emotional state? We can't just see it. They have to tell us. And Romeo's not talking to anyone. He shuts himself off from the world. Okay, I think what this does is there's few ideas about love. This play is about love. It's about a tragedy of love. But what does it say? I think one comment that is making is that love is a psychological, irrational state because Romeo is doing something irrational. He's making himself an artificial knight. I think more generally speaking, this kind of love, we do not know how the person feels. The person needs to tell us. It's very interesting. So when Benvolio meets Romeo, and that's in line 159. Let's turn to that in the text. Benvolio says, "Good morrow, cousin," and Romeo says, "Is the day so young?" Romeo isn't even aware of the time. He doesn't know anything about the external world. He is in his subjective world. And Benvolio says, "But noon struck 9, it's 9 o'clock in the morning." And Romeo says, "Ay me, said hours seem long." This again adds the idea that there is natural world. Time is passing. Romeo is not even aware of it. He is in his internal, subjective world and outside of time because of his psychological state. Okay. Benvolio asked what's going on and he's, "Are you in love?" And Romeo says, "Out." In other words, he's out of love. Well, he loves Rosalind, but Benvolio says to Let's look at some advice. I think it's line 182 and 45 and 50, around that. On the first bit of advice, in the second scene, he tells the way that you can escape this love you have, Rosalind, is through contrasting her with someone else. You take a look at another person, you find another person, and you forget about Rosalind. But Romeo doesn't agree with this idea. He's very devout to Rosalind. But we gotta find out later that he's not really devout to her, because when he says that Juliet. So let's look, line 45. So, Tatman, one fire burns out another burning. One pain is lessened by another anguish. Turn giddy, be happy, and be hope by backward turning. One desperate grief cures with another languish. Take thou some new infection in thy eye. This is a very sound advice. If you have something that happens to you, just do something to balance it. So the advice continues, and Benvolio invites Romeo to go to the Capulets' masquerade party. He tells them, at this same ancient feast of Capulets sups, she's eating there, the fair Rosalind, that thou so loves, but all the admired beauties of the Verona. So he tells Romeo, when you go to this party, Rosalind's going to be there, but there are going to be also other beautiful girls too, and you should compare her face with some that I shall show. So look at Rosalind, and then look at other girls and compare. See if she compares, and I will make your swan a crow. Nice little line out there. And Romeo says, when the devout religion of mine eye maintains such falsehood, then turn tears to fire. Meaning, it's impossible. I will never look at other girls, and I will never overcome Rosalind. But we will learn in the next lesson that this is not true. He is not this devout as he should be. Hopefully we've seen this dichotomy, the idea that one pain can replace another, or the idea that artificial night versus the natural daylight, or natural time versus the subjective time. Another thing we're going to see throughout the dichotomy of light and dark, and I asked you to look for that in the text. So when Romeo has that natural light in the next lesson, when he first sees Juliet, he's going to see that same idea to describe her, first as the moon and then later is the sun. Very interesting too. We'll have to look at that later. So let's look more closely at Romeo's very famous short monologues. And this is one of the first times that he actually speaks beautifully in the text. We'll see this in line 169 to 181. And I want you to look for this use of two literary devices. One is called oxymoron. An oxymoron is when you take two words that should not go together, have other opposite meaning, and then you put them together. Example might be if I have someone in the movie with a really strong guy, and then we call him Tiny. This is my friend Tiny, but he's huge. That's an oxymoron. The other one is similar. It's called antithesis. Antithesis, the opposite idea. This is when you take two words that are opposites and you use them in a phrase. Romeo makes use of these words when he thinks of love in these lines. Let's take a look. He says, line 169, alas, that love whose view is muffled still should without eyes see pathways to his will. Where shall we die? Oh me! What fray was here yet? Tell me not, for I have heard it all. This is where Romeo comes and he sees the fight and he says, I don't even care about this, dismissing objective reality. And here he antithesis and the oxymorons. Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. Antithesis. Why then, oh, brawling love? It's fighting love. It's an oxymoron. Oh, loving hate. Oxymoron. Oh, anything of nothing, first create. Anything, nothing. Oh, heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms. Chaos and form, heavy lightness, serious vanity. Feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep. That is not what it is. This love I feel no love in this. Dost thou not laugh? This is such a wonderful idea of how we feel when we're in love, especially when we're in this kind of love that Romeo is experiencing right now, which is called unwedded love. He loves someone, but they don't love him back. I think probably you have experienced, if you haven't experienced that yet, you will experience in your life that sadly, and then you will feel what Romeo feels, that love is not what it should be. When we look at the text, we have some idea of symbolism that I wanted you to look, light and darkness, and then we start again some philosophical ideas about love, and then we look at different kinds of love. Romeo is talking about unrequited love, but actually we're going to rock that the love that Romeo feels for Rosalind is not really love. It's infatuation. He has a crush on her. That's all it is. And he can quickly forget her when he meets Juliet. But the love that he feels for Juliet is another question. So what is the love that he feels for his friends, for his parents? There's a lot of complexities in the love here. That's part of what this play is discussing or suggesting about the psychological state. So let's look a little bit at Romeo's relationship with Benvolio. And we're using the meter now in the play to see the relationship between characters. I want to show you one example to remind you. Right after Romeo's speech with his antithesis and his oxymoron, dost thou not laugh? No cause, or rather weep. Do you see how they end each other's lines here? Dost thou not laugh? No cause, I rather weep. It's iambic pentameter, 10 syllables, when he finishes his line, and then Romeo says, good heart, at what? At thy heart's oppression. It's the same thing again, and then Romeo ends that line, why such is love's transgression, which ends the meter, and the previous line, and they also rhyme, oppression, transgression. What that reveals is that Benvolio and Romeo are very good friends. Next time, I want to look at Romeo meets Juliet, and we're gonna start a little bit more insights of his character and questions about love in the form of tragedy, how it works. So prepare yourselves for the next lesson. We'll get to meet Juliet.